Hello and welcome to Nikon Sessions. In today's episode, I'm joined by three incredible photographers and we're going to be talking about photography and self-expression. I just want to start off by going through some introductions. If you guys can tell me a little bit about you.
Yeah, my name is Heather Agyepong. I am a visual artist and an actor, and my work is kind of lens and performance based. It's around mental health and well-being.
My name's Carolyn Mendelsohn and I'm a portrait photographer. A lot of my work is about amplifying voices of people who aren't seen, who are marginalised, but also about exploring how stories can be told through photography and other art forms like sound and film.
My name is Hermelio Miguel Kino. Most people call me Kino. I'm a fashion photographer and director. I mostly shoot a lot of advertising work, a lot of commercial work I shoot a lot.
So, the first question I really want to start with is, what motivates your photography? How have you got to where you are? What do you do? All those types of things. We'll start here.
Ooh, what motivates me? There's like so much, but I think really centrally is me.
Yeah.
My work is self-portraiture, so I'm always in the frame. So this idea of kind of uncovering layers of myself is what I'm really interested in. I was doing a psychology degree and I just went on and bought a camera and then I just started putting it on myself, and I felt like the more I put it on myself, the more I was kind of understand what I was going through, because it was a particularly difficult time in my mental health. It felt quite cathartic taking pictures of myself. So I motivate myself in a non-arrogant way.
Sure.
That's so interesting. I mean, I think I started, the camera for me was a tool to explore creativity at a time where my world was particularly small. So I started off in theatre as an actor and director and then moved into film, and then I couldn't do that anymore. And I was lost, so I picked a camera up and I realised that I could do the same thing in a single frame. Just
like these two, I was an actor. I was an actor from the age of 5 until I was 30. I did a lot of theater and I've done some TV work, but it was mostly stage. I probably did like over 50 plays that I acted in. And I think when I hit 30, I wanted to get into directing, because I also at the time was writing scripts and I had all these stories I wanted to get out to the world, and I wanted to express myself with the filmmaking medium. So I just picked up a film camera, a 35 like f5 film camera, and I just realized that I can express myself through this medium instantly, and that just really motivated me to just continue with photography, and surprisingly that ended up helping me become a director.
I think one of the interesting things you've all mentioned there is that you are actors, right? Or at least had some background in acting, which I think is a really cool common interest. So I'd love to just have a bit of discussion about what it's like being in front of and then also behind the camera. And in your case, obviously, both now as well, right? So, yeah.
Oh, man. There is something, I was thinking about the distinction between my visual artwork and my acting work. And for me, in my acting stuff, I guess I am trying to channel somebody else or kind of leave myself alone and have this sort of sense of like radical empathy for a character. But in my visual artwork, I have that empathy for myself. But I guess there is I don't know if you both feel this, there's a certain kind of bravery or interest in vulnerability when you've acted, I guess.
Yeah.
Because you're so kind of exposed, even though you're playing a different character. I think that might help my photography more, being interested in vulnerability. What do you both think about that?
Well, I think that's interesting because I think for me it's the photography and drama, theatre, acting, film. For me, it's about telling a story. So as an actor, I was telling a story. As a director, I had a bit more control over how the story was going to be told. And that was kind of comfortable for me. I could look at it and see it. And again, with film, there was an experimentalness for me, using kind of moving images. And I think what I love to do with photography is I'm still thinking about an audience and looking at that picture and what that picture says to them, which connects with the theatre and drama for me.
For me, I grew up in the Bronx. I grew up in the South Bronx, and one of the reasons why I got into acting is because I used to see these like interesting characters in the Bronx in New York, and I wanted to mimic them, you know, and I wanted to, you know, kind of like dive into their world and kind of like almost be them, to kind of like understand like why are they so quirky, why are they so weird and interesting. I just want to know so much about them, and I want to photograph them in the way that people want to know about them. And that people want to know more about their world, and I try to capture that, you know, through my photography and in the lenses that I choose.
When you're taking your portraits, your photographs, do you have your director's head on? Do you have your actor's head on when you're creating that scene?
I mostly have like a sort of, like a director's head on. I try to take the portrait or a series of portraits to create a single story, because I'm always putting myself in the audience point of view of what they're thinking these frames are about.
It's kind of intriguing, isn't it? And what about you
Why? I try to leave, I think with my visual art stuff, I try to leave the actor hat alone, because the actor hat often is a performance of something. But the photographer, the camera in my visual artwork feels like my friend. I feel safe with the camera, which allows me to kind of have the true Heather hat on, whatever that looks like.
So it's kind of almost like you're able to be much more vulnerable. You're able to take the layers off.
Absolutely, yeah. It's kind of like quite a therapeutic process where I'm thinking about a memory or something that's happened in the past, and I'm trying to kind of reimagine myself in that memory.
You obviously took this one here in the middle. I really love that one. Like, there's, you know, it's like a jumping point for me, just watching that, of how many stories you can tell within that series.
Yeah.
And it's really captivating. It really does. It just like draws you in. Like I want to know more about that person. I know it's you, but I want to know more what's happened here. Like, how did that person get into that?
Were they influenced by art or by a kind of particular genre?
These images?
Yeah.
They're a reimagination of 19th century postcards. So they actually have historical references to these black performers doing this dance called the cakewalk. But in the images, they kind of like lack agency and ownership. So I wanted to reimagine myself as those characters.
I think as a portrait photographer, I want the people I work with to take their space.
Love that.
So it's not about me. So my role within that is to create a space for them to be who they are in quite a powerful way. But aesthetically, I'm also wanting that to work as a portrait.
That's what, I mean, I try to do that when I'm like shooting fashion. Like, I try to, because I sympathize with the model, because I used to be an actor, and I know that there's so much pressure on the model. So I really try to sympathize so much with the model. I try to create like a really safe space. I try to create an environment where they just sort of like forget about all the people that are in the room, and then I just try to connect with them in a way that they feel safe, and in a way that they can just be who they are. But what you do is, you know, is challenging, because you got to get them to trust you from the beginning.
Yeah, you do, and it's that realizing. I don't know about you, and I know that you're doing self-portraits, but I'm always thinking about how terrified I am when I have my photo taken. So I kind of try to connect with them and say, look, I really know how you may be feeling, because most people really are uncomfortable in that situation of having all the focus on them. So I go, what I want you to do is to really enjoy this experience, but not to worry about the picture.
One of the things that's also worth talking about as well is, what do you feel like is a finalized image to you? So one of the terms a lot of people say is that an image might not be finished until it's printed, or seeing an image that's printed can really bring that to life and make you feel like that's you represented as in a printed form. Do you feel like that's changing? Do you feel like actually seeing an image digitally now is just as good? Or is it that a print still has a special place in your heart?
I think for me, as I moved up and started shooting a lot and doing things for like brands, And whenever I do my own thing, I've just really have a different connection when I see them printed. Like sometimes I see them printed, I'm like, did I shoot that? Like, whoa, like, I'm not saying this whether it's good or bad. I'm just like, it just takes you into a different world, because for me, like I have like a more emotional connection when it's printed.
There is a connectivity you feel to the work that you don't get digitally, right?
No,
like,
yeah.
There's something like immersive, and I feel like people who make work in terms of photography and self-expression, there is a connectiveness and emotiveness that happens when you actually see the work. That kind of only happens when you're in the room and in the presence of the work. So, but then I also think accessibility and people from all kind of different walks of life or who can't get into spaces, having it digitally, that's also like a gift for them too. So I'm kind of in the middle of both of them.
I'd love to take that question a little bit further for you specifically, because when you see an image printed, you're also looking at yourself.
Myself. Yeah.
Is that something that you when you look at that image, are you seeing yourself, or are you maybe seeing yourself as a character? How does that work?
That is such a good question. I think for my like therapeutic process, when the image is then printed, it doesn't feel like me. It feels like someone else. So it kind of feels like a full stop to a moment or a time in my life. So there is like, I don't really recognize myself in these images because I knew what I was kind of going through and all of that. So it feels like an old version of Heather. So there is something I think I need as the author of the work for it to be printed, for it to be an end to something. When you have kind of this beautiful image of this person, does it feel like, can you see yourself in the image too?
So with the Being in Between project, I made that to be exhibited. I was doing it because of how I felt as a 10 to 12-year-old, how uncomfortable I felt and how I lacked agency and how thoughts in my head were bigger than my head and I couldn't tell anyone about them.
Yep.
And the things that people said to me at that age became how I saw myself.
Right.
Yep.
And I thought, well, this is really interesting. As an adult, I thought that's so interesting how vulnerable we are at that point and how things can change how we become. So I wanted to then invite girls of that age to have their portraits taken in the clothes of their own choice and to ask them about their lives and to ask them what their hopes, what they were scared of, what their dreams were. I wanted these girls to be in art galleries. I wanted the pictures to have an iconic feel, to give them an importance and an agency. But I'm going to involve them in the process as well. So it becomes a collaboration between me and them. But the end portrait I wanted to be big and I wanted them to be looking at us and having it printed large in different spaces and also then becoming a book, I think gives them a real power that they don't have.
Sure.
It's amazing to have work printed. I would really recommend to all photographers to get your work printed.
Yeah.
I think it gives it a different
It
power,
does, yeah.
doesn't
I
it?
mean, I was just looking at this and I was like, whoa.
It is incredible.
What the hell?
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's just, yeah, when I was approaching this work, I had the same intention that I wanted people to get sucked into this world of where they're at, what they're thinking. I wanted to bring them into this location to just kind of show the world how these like wonderful people are living and how this, and trying to bring light to this charity that did, rebuild their homes. I grew up in a very sort of like impoverished sort of neighborhood and I always felt like, wow, these people are just gonna be forgotten, you know. So like when I went there, it was almost like kind of therapeutic in a way, like, like kind of going back there and being like, oh, I have to treat this with so much like respect because I kind of feel I kind of owe it to like myself when I was younger, that I wish someone came and like documented us. I don't know if that makes any sense.
Yeah, no, it does. Absolutely. And also something I was just thinking just then
Yeah.
was we're all a bit emotional, aren't we, really?
Oh, right.
Very much
rather
so.
than like thinking this has to be precise, this has to. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm sure there is a technical side. Of course, there's a
Yeah.
technical side to
Yeah.
doing things. But when you talk about your work, there's this big emotional pull. When I'm talking about my work, it's very emotional. When you're talking about your work, it's the exploration of your
Yeah.
own emotional journey. So that's kind of an interesting synergy, I think.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I mean, when I first started, I was really obsessed with like everything technical. Like I wanted to learn everything about lighting. I wanted to learn how to compose this image. And when I was shooting film, I was like, I want to develop this the same way that Ansel Adams developed it. I want to use the gray zone. Like I was like really, really obsessed. And then like as I got, older, like for me, it just like became like, who's in front of the camera?
Yeah.
Like, who is this person? Like, how can I try to communicate who they are? When it comes to like portraits, like you can see here, I try not to touch it. Like I try, like maybe I might lift a shadow here and there. Like a couple of years ago, I might have been like, oh, the other eye is out of focus. Oh, this image doesn't work. I'm gonna can it. But like now I'm just like, yeah, like I even welcome the imperfections, you know what I mean? Because for me, the image is real because I was there and I felt that I captured the essence of them while they were there.
With more pictures being taken than ever before, we've obviously talked a lot about how we express ourselves through our photography, but do you feel like more people can just use any camera now? It doesn't have to be a professional camera, but any person can now take a self-portrait, and the term the selfie's kind of become out of nowhere almost, right? And the photography's changed drastically over the years. It's a lot more accessible now. And do you think that that's helped photography? Do you think that's helped like even your stuff with your work? Because there's so many different ways that people can take pictures now as well. It's just that transition from what photography used to be to what it is now is completely different, I think.
I think with the phone, people have an ability to take their own images and also find a love for photography, and I think that's really helped photography as a whole because it really like catapulted people to explore more about photography, and especially the use of social media, how people are able to share moments that they feel are really intimate. So there are things that I love about the fact that photography's become more accessible, and then there are other bits that I kind of I'm a bit fearful of the future, especially with AI and all this kind of stuff. But I think photography's been going on for like over hundreds of years now, like 100 years or something like that, maybe a little bit more. So I think it's still going to continue because we all, it seems, have this conceptual mind. So the work that we're producing really comes from within us, and we want to express it through the use of photography.
I think so, and I think it's great that people can take photos on their phone. I think it's fantastic. But what it does do is it opens up a kind of visual vocabulary.
Yes.
So we live in a much more visual world now, and I think those people that are going to pursue photography as an art form or as a technical practice move from phone to camera. It means that people have more knowledge visually and can start to look at the world in a different way and look at our images in a different way too.
Yeah.
You're so right about photography being about language. I can send an image to someone and they'll know what I mean. So it's part of our vocabulary now, using images. But I think two things. Because of it being so democratic, it's great because people have access, but I guess it's that concern of like, when will photography be considered a true art form? And for me, the concept is the most important thing rather than kind of the technicality. So that's just why I call myself an artist. And this was the last image in the series I took. I remember I was shattered. I think I was like, I've got 10 minutes. Let me just think of like the last image. So the project's called Ego Death, and it's about Carl Jung's concept of the shadow, this idea that everybody has a repressed personality that they're ashamed of, but the more you repress it, the more it shows up. So the project was about kind of exposing my own shadow.
And you're making the choices of colour
Yes,
And
blue felt
yeah.
really important. I had a filter on top of the lens, but also I enhanced it to make it blue because of this a poem called Black Boys Look Blue in Moonlight, and it's based on a film called Moonlight. And Moonlight, this idea of truth telling and revelation in like moonlight. So that felt really important to put into the images.
So it's kind of a really truly original expression, artistic expression, I think, your work.
Yeah.
And I think I cross over because I do much more kind of formal portraiture, but the thought processes aren't always formal. So I think I'd love to share the process of the portrait of Rosal Schatzberger there. So I was invited to take portraits of people who had escaped or survived the Holocaust and the generations afterwards. So Rosal Schatzberger is in that photograph is 96, was from Vienna, and escaped as a 13-year-old via Prague. And that's her daughter, Leslie, who's a clarinetist. So I wanted them both in that picture. And we talked about art, and I'm always looking at a picture of, I'm thinking and I'm referencing traditional paintings in a lot of ways with that picture. I'm looking at the light, but also the story that picture tells, because I'm wanting that not just to be a picture of Rosal Schatzberger, I'm wanting it to have more layers. So she's holding a photograph of her mother-in-law, Ida, who was murdered in Auschwitz. And Leslie, who's Ida's granddaughter, never met her.
Yeah.
But what you can see if you look really carefully is that Leslie's face reflects onto the portrait of Ida. So, it kind of gives layers. And I think having looked at art and my background, I'm looking at all those things that will help to tell something more powerful and more compelling, but be true to the story of the individual. So yes, I think that's why I wanted to kind of talk about that particular portrait.
Yeah, it is amazing. I really love the composition, and how you mentioned the layering, and the softness of the light. And what I also like about the image is how, she's like on her knees, and the way that she's holding herself is just, you kind of really respect like whoever you're photographing, and you just give them the ability to just be powerful in the space, and there's just so much. Is dignity the right word? I don't know how to.
I think so. It's giving people space, but it's also, I'm also thinking about that final image at the same time.
Of course. Yeah.
So it's not just about being empathic, or I'm also trying to craft something that will work. So there's a lot of things going on.
Yeah, loads of things.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
So one final thing I'd like to ask all of you is if there was somebody that was new to photography or new to art, and they're a new artist, and they wanted to really discover like their self-expression through either art or photography, what would that advice be that you would want to give them?
What was really important for me was finding someone I connected to, an artist kind of like me. So Rosie Martin was a real huge inspiration for me in terms of photography and psychology. And I just listen to her talk a lot, and just sometimes finding inspiration from other people sometimes give you the confidence to just do your own thing. So I'd say probably find someone who really inspires you, and also find a community to have a chat with for support.
Definitely good advice, that. I've really simple advice, and I think I always say this. I always say to people, take your worst picture. Never be afraid to try things out, to experiment, to do your worst. Keep your eyes open, and look at other work, look at artists, look at film, look at all those things that will feed you.
Yeah.
But then don't be scared, because if you're frightened to take a picture because you think it's not going to be good enough, then you will never ever take your best photograph.
Yeah, I think that you both of you have touched on similar things I wanted to say. I think For me, when I first started, I got really obsessed with the technical stuff, and I watched so many, videos on technical stuff, and it can kind of put you in a situation where you never want to touch a camera because you're like, oh, I don't know the technical stuff. But I think you're absolutely right. Just take your worst photo. Go. I mean, whether it's with a phone or with a camera, just go out there and shoot.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, thank you so much. We've talked about some really incredible stories there and had some great discussion as well. So thank you all so much. Thank you so much for watching at home, and I hope that you join us for the next episode of Nikon Sessions on the Nikon Europe YouTube channel.